our first episode on the Defense Against Disaster channel today, and the series titled False Allegations Against Islam and Its Prophet. For today's opening episode, we discuss the vile statement made some time ago by Richard Dawkins. Now, it's very important that we tackle the subject matter firstly with Mr. Richard Dawkins being the primary aspect of the false allegations, simply because we must place on record as well that we have nothing against the man. I don't know him personally, and there's no agenda here. However, as Muslims, it becomes our responsibility to stand up and voice our opinions against those people who at times may use a particular power that they wield to paint Islam in a negative light by vilifying it and making it look what it is not to be at all. Now, Mr. Dawkins himself has gone on since then to make some other radical statements. So for the next few episodes, we will be discussing or keeping in focus some of these statements made by Mr. Richard Dawkins. And you will see that these statements are not as intellectual or coming from a person who is intellectually sound as he is made out to be. Now, of course, he is very, very famous within his own circles and maybe infamous in some others. And Mr. Dawkins is regarded to be one of the great intellectuals of our time. And let's be honest, let's be clear. I mean, his word is taken to be religiously law, kind of like gospel when he says a thing. And in amongst many of those many statements that he's made, he has uttered something that has hurt many, many Muslims in the past, for which we have not even got an apology from Mr. Dawkins for. And as a result, it's kind of perpetuated in a way that we need a response to this, because it seems as though that either there is no response to it or that Mr. Dawkins himself has been let off quite easily. So this is what Mr. Dawkins had to say pertaining to Islam.
I regard Islam as one of the great evils in the world. I regard Islam as one of the great evils in the world.
So as you can see, this great intellectual of our time makes it very, very clear that Islam, in his opinion, he regards Islam to be one of the great evils in our world. Now, descriptively, I would, if I had to explain what I felt when I heard that, I would say comically annoying, basically on the perspective of what we know and the reaction of it, right? It's an oxymoron grammatically. And if an oxymoron could manifest itself into a physical being, then it would look a lot like Mr. Self-contradicting Dawkins himself. Now, why would I say such a thing? Is it something scholarly to say? Well, if a scholar the likes of Richard Dawkins can come out on television and paint the entire religion of Islam as nothing but evil, then of course we also can have our say. And since we come to the problems of the actual statement, you will see that there are three basic problems of this. And it is hoped that we can use this as a yardstick when we are discussing with atheists in general. So, Mr. Dawkins says that in his regard, Islam is one of the great evils in the world. Problem number one. The very word evil itself, to be utilized by Mr. Richard Dawkins, is quite paradoxical, quite perplexing. Why? Well, I'm not sure about you, but I've always been told that atheism does not subscribe to the concept of evil as in morality and moral law or objective morality, the way people who subscribe to religion do, those who believe in God, that good and evil comes from an innate quality that God has created within us. So scientists who eventually become inclined to atheism, not all, they themselves today cannot agree on morality. So Mr. Richard Dawkins has his own view, and of course those who follow and agree with him will tend to follow that specific ideal. And there are others who have their own viewpoint on morality. But Mr. Dawkins, the word evil itself in its etymology comes from the Anglo-Saxon tradition, which is created by people who believed in God. So now what are we going to do? Are we now going to say that words which were even created by men of God should not even be used in the language as well? So how can you say that Islam is a great evil in the world when you yourself and the realm of atheism itself cannot agree on what is objective morality? So on premise number one, it is a contradiction that a man who himself does not believe in the concept of evil calls Islam a great evil in the world. As far as the second fallacy of his argument is concerned, and this, every Muslim who has ever been bombarded by the intellectual persona of the professors and the atheists out there who try to maybe create questions in order to have this perception of doubt placed into the hearts and minds of Muslims. Always try and remember these little things. Mr. Dawkins, if you can envisage once more, he looks very much an intellectual as well. And we have a lot of people these days, sometimes you want to just look intellectual. So what do? You put on a pair of glasses, a pair of spectacles in other countries as they call it. Well, Mr. Dawkins, rude awakening to you and to all of those atheists out there who share the very same sentiments regarding Islam without thinking. And to all my Muslim brothers and sisters out there, if you were ever faced with someone who disbelieves in God, that's okay, that's according to his belief system, that's fine. We will try our level best to make him understand, but that's fine. He's made his choice. But don't let a person sit in front of you wearing a pair of glasses and then tell you that Islam is a great evil in the world. Mr. Dawkins, have you forgotten history? As a student of knowledge, are you unaware of a great name by the name of Ibn al-Haytham, the Arab, Persian, Muslim scholar, who wrote the book on optics known as Kitab al-Nadha'ir, who is known as the founding father of the principles of optics, without whose efforts and discovery in the field of optics, those very glasses which makes you look even more intellectual than you try to be would not be possible. So all of these evidences that you look towards to validate your claims would not be possible without a Muslim and the works and efforts of a Muslim scholar. Now, would this be considered as evil? Well, I leave that up to you.
I'm pessimistic about the Islamic world. I regard Islam as one of the great evils in the world.
The third problem and the fallacy of the statement of Mr. Richard Dawkins, which to me is perplexing of the highest order, is Mr. Dawkins says that in his regard, according to him, that Islam is one of the great evils of the world. Now, before I actually get into this fallacy of the statement again for the third dimensional issue in the matter, a quick example of what is wrong with it. Imagine you sat in the company of someone who claims to be a surgeon, and this surgeon goes on and on about his work and the many contributions that he has brought forth to the table of medical science. And then suddenly someone asks him, what is a scalpel? And he's unaware of that. Do you think that we would be able to put our trust and faith in a surgeon who, with all of his vaunting efforts to display his field and his contributions, doesn't know what a scalpel is? I don't think we'd have much faith in a person of that nature. Imagine going to a mechanic who boasts about all of the things he has done to make the engine move smoothly, and then he fails to acknowledge the importance of fuel. Well, this is what Mr. Dawkins has done. But those who were unaware were not able to piece together the fallacy of his claim. He says that Islam is one of the great evils of the world. However, he's failed to acknowledge the history of science itself. In my latest book, Defense Against Disaster, I will just read for you a quick quote regarding the same scholar who also supplied the knowledge for Mr. Dawkins' classes, Ibn al-Haytham, who was not just a master in the field of optics, but a polymath, and also a master in various other fields, particularly in physics and science in general. This particular scholar, Ibn al-Haytham, is regarded by many, in fact, for those of you who don't believe me, a simple word search even in your Wikipedia page will reveal that he is regarded to be the founding father of the scientific method. Now, we have Rosanna Gurini, who I've cited in my book. In her book, Al-Haytham, The Man of Experience, First Steps in the Science of Vision, she writes, due to his quantitative, empirical, and experimental approach to physics and science, he, in other words, Ibn al-Haytham, is considered the pioneer of the modern scientific method. Now, Mr. Dawkins, what would you as a scientist be, or who would you be as a scientist without the scientific method? The scientific method is the very method that all scientists are boasting about in relation to whatever theory and hypothesis that they come up with, the empirical means of knowledge and so forth. This scientific method is what makes them to be who they are. But guess what? The father and one of the founding fathers of this scientific method is a Muslim Arab scholar, Ibn al-Haytham. So let's take the statement of Mr. Dawkins in context now. If Islam is one of the great evils in the world, and this Islam, which is supposedly a great evil, gave birth to Muslim scholars, the likes of Ibn al-Haytham, through whom majority of the world can wear glasses today, and through whom majority of the universities of the world can actually teach science and the scientific method, then is Mr. Dawkins not a result of the evil created by the evil created by Islam? The logic of that is quite simple. In essence, if Mr. Dawkins wants to stick by his statement, then he must agree what evil is, and that he himself is a result of that evil, because without Islam, he would not have had the scientific method that makes him to be that intellectual that he claims to be today. Now, once more, we have no issue with Mr. Dawkins. He's probably, in person, a good man. Probably, well, if the word good on objective morality can actually be played into the process, but fine. I have no quarrel with him. But to Mr. Dawkins and to the atheists and to the bigots out there, to the Islamophobes and the haters out there, you must understand that for every objection, there is definitely a response. And if this continuous vilification of Islam and its Prophet and the Quran continues, then of course there will be responses. And yes, this is just a vague response. The intellectual responses from the scholars, from the ulama, are there. It's just a matter of time. And we will be responding in the next week's episode as well, continuing to show you that Mr. Dawkins has an agenda. And this agenda will be made clear from his own words. And the ripple effects of it, inshallah, will be revealed in time. We hope that you will join us on our next episode. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel and get others to join in as well, so that we can spread the word of Islam and correct the false notions out there. Once more, we have nothing against the atheists in general as far as they go as individuals, but we are here to defend Islam regardless of the consequence. If anything good has been achieved, the praise belongs to Allah, the faults are mine. We bid you farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.